I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to a Way Out Big Book study here on Big Book Compendium. Um, it's just me flying solo tonight. Um, it's Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Howard had some other things he needed to take care of, which is I think I can handle it. So you know, tonight we're taking. Last week when we ended, there's a solution. I said this is the last time in this book we're going to talk about the symptom of alcoholism. From here on, the fun begins because now we get into the to union with God, the journey to union with God. It's like the way I call it. And I want to start off by reading something from Time magazine, actually. And I don't know the date of this or anything like that. So hold on one second. I lost you guys. There it's everybody. Hold on one second and get my thing set up. So this is from Time magazine, one of their millennia issues or something. It said, the greatest minds in the world from the universities and the medical fields, government, welfare groups, and even scientists have spent millions of dollars in an attempt to find the cause of alcoholism. Yet no one's been able to place their finger upon the exact cause. However, it has now become conscious opinion of these great minds that they have attacked the problem for many years, that a lack of proper spiritual application on the part of the victim is at least a primary cause of the problem. So the solution must be proper spiritual application to overcome it, something AA has taught for over 75 years. So I'm going to do one more reading, and this is one that I have a tradition whenever I do a book study to read, and you can find it online too. Um, it's by a poet named Robert Fulghum, and he's not an alcoholic or like that, but he writes his poem, and it just nails the God of the understanding aspect for me. He says, "Water." It's called water. It's the flow like water. Water is everywhere. In all living things, we cannot be separated from water. We all need water to survive. No water, no life. No water, no planet. It has purity, clarity, calmness, bringing harmony to any environment. It is tranquil and peaceful, always flowing with patience. It cleanses and purifies whatever it touches, bringing life to what seemed at once lifeless. Water comes in many forms: liquid, vapor, ice, snow, fog, rain, hail. But no matter what the form, it's still water. Although we give it many names and many languages, it's crazy to argue over what name it is. Call it what you will, it makes no difference to the water. It is what it is. We drink it from many containers: cups, glasses, skins, our own hands. To argue about which container is best to use the water is crazy. The container does not change the water. Some like it hot, some like it cold, some like it ice, some like it fizzy, some in mixed. It does not change the nature of the water. Never mind the name or cup in the mix. These are not important. What we all have common is thirst. Thirst for the water of life. As is with water, so it is with God. And so if you take the beginning of that and you just say, and change water for God, God is everywhere in all living things, so forth. So it's a really, the one thing I like to bring up is in recovery, it always mind blows me, at least where I live in California, and I've been to other states where they did the same thing. I've been, they kind of want to sweep God under the rug, and God's the nucleus of this program. Some people, even meetings will say, no, too much God talk tonight and stuff like that. I mean, the goal of steps is to form a relationship with God. Um, and I want to show you guys, that God is mentioned several times in this book. Not show you, mention it to you. From the title page to 164, God's mentioned 134 times. And there's other words also. Creator 12 times, Father once, Father light once, great reality once, higher power twice, maker twice, power greater than himself 4 times, power greater than myself 4 times, power greater than ourselves 4 times, power greater than themselves once, power greater than yourself once, power beyond ourselves once, power 4 times, spirit 5 times, spirit of the universe 4 times, supreme being 2 times, thy 9 times, thee twice. And that's sure a lot of God talk. And that's 196 times to be exact. And that's not counting words like he, him, or his, which I didn't count. So, like I said, the nucleus program is God, yet nobody desires to get deep discussion about it from, within the walls. And in recovery, when I got sober in 2000, um, it wasn't like that. It was a different, people glued to the people to talk about God. But I guess I'm saying it's not just gonna be a whole lot of God talk. So I'm going to start off by doing a screen share, and this is called the belief index, and this is going to lead us to We Agnostics. It's a great way to lead to We Agnostics. They keep changing this in here. Okay, so this is the belief index, and so we have words atheist, theist, agnostic, and gnostic. Of course, most of us familiar with the 2 A words in there, right? So I'm going to go down this list and explain to you guys what this crazy graph is. So the atheist, does not, you know, so the thing about the atheist is they're one who rejects the idea of spiritual belief or religious beliefs and denies the existence of God. So they try to prove God doesn't exist. You know, an atheist does not have an affirmative like belief system. There is no God. They simply reject the idea of God or higher power. So to them, God's illogical, and it's what I like to call it's a mental conviction without certain proof. So here on the top of this index, you have belief, decision, action, which would be like 4 through 9, results, growth, and knows. Right now, the thing about it is, this person, um, they, I have it blank here because they don't believe. But can an atheist, so the aspect is if they stay that way and say, I don't want any of these steps, they're not going to make a decision, no action, no growth, no results, no, they don't know. But it's a gray area because I met lots of people and sponsor people who are atheists. And does that mean they can't do the steps? Absolutely, they can do the steps. Anyone that does the steps going to have something happen to them, no matter what they call their being. And I've met lots of people who claim they're atheists who do the steps, and I've never met what I consider a true atheist because they discover the same thing that I found: peace of mind, love. They just don't call God. But anyone who does this can happen. The next one is a theist, and this is a really gray area as well. And that's, the believer, the strict believer, only believes. They mean, so believing means to trust with confidence that we'll just say God is true or real in the spiritual sense. So the theists, all they do is believe, but they do not make a decision, and they don't, so they're not going to get any of the other results. No action. And I always ask people, do you want belief or do you want knowledge? Right? Because believing is similar to theory. A theory is accepted beliefs or views that you do not know because you've never experienced them. How do you know something? From experiencing it. Anything else is a theory. So believing kind of falls in the category of not knowing. You don't need proof to believe. Most importantly, a belief is handed to you. Someone else gave it to you. This is what you're supposed to believe in. This is what you're supposed to do. This is how it's done. Follow my lead type thing. If a believer were honestly to define their relationship with God, they probably look at it would like they're describing some type of deep admiration. They love God, they know God, they know a whole lot about God, but they don't know God. A belief, no matter how sincere, if not followed by action, there's no change. All they have is a belief. Again, it's a mental conviction without certain proof, just like the atheist. So, so in a belief, um, is a belief in God sufficient for long-term recovery? No. It's not to overcome alcoholism. We need, something deeper than a belief. Is a belief sufficient to begin our journey? Absolutely. Saying you believe in God is true or real might give you a psychic change, but not the entire psychic change we're looking for. A good analogy that I like to use is in Lake Fort, Texas. They have the largest, of course, this is a belief I have because someone told me about it, but I'm going to make up it with me. But in Lake Fort, Texas, they have the largest, baths in the world. They're like, 28 inches long and 30-pound monsters, nothing like it. And you can, I could tell you all about it, but you can take my word for it and believe, this fish based on my testimony, that these fish exist. You can believe, you know, or come with me to Texas when the next time I go out there and we'll experience the fish together, and then the fish exist. The next one is agnostic. This is one we're quite familiar with. So agnostic, the A is a prefix for not, like the atheist is a prefix for not. And agnostic is unsure of the existence of God, unsure, and so that's based on unsatisfactory, insufficient evidence. So to say, it's not that they do not deny God, that God might exist. They don't believe or disbelieve. They cannot confirm it, or deny it, whatever you want to say. They don't know, just unsure because they've never experienced it. They want proof. So they're skeptical, but they do, like I said, they don't disapprove it either. They just don't rule out the possibility that might be there. Uncertain claims from lack of knowledge falls in the category not knowing, kind of the space between the believer um, and the atheist. So I think most of us were agnostic. Some of us were. I mean, I was when I came in here, and I thought I was atheist, and I realized I wasn't. So the chart, the agnostic person, the reason there's question marks, can they get past the believing? Maybe they do. Maybe they make a decision. Maybe they do this. Maybe they can still have all this happen, right? The best way I can describe it is, so I mean, one thing I want to say, if you take no action, there's no difference. If they take no action, there's no difference between them and anyone else I mentioned so far. But the best analogy I've ever heard is the agnostic goldfish. And it's a Sandy Beach used to tell this story about the agnostic goldfish. And he would say, so Ali and I are these two goldfish swimming in water, and we're swimming upstream. And Emily swims by us and she says, "Ain't the water beautiful?" and swims away. I look at Ali, I go, "Hey, man, that's the answer to life. We need to go find the water." We're in the water, and that's where I was. I was like a fish swimming upstream looking for water, you know? And then we have the most, last but not least, the Gnostic. Now, it's going beyond believing and getting a spiritual understanding of knowing God. And that's a result of spiritual conversion, like of experience or an awakening. They know God exists because they've experienced God. And again, how do you know something from experiencing it? Direct experience with, as I like to say, with the divine. Very simple. Um, that awakens, that awakens a spark within us, union with God. So it's a path of liberation from the material world to what we call in AA the world of the spirit, or and or the fellowship of the spirit, either one. But once the lights are on, it cannot be turned off. So the big question is, how do you go beyond belief and experience God? How do we know God? Very simple answer, the steps. So the chart is simple. This person believes, maybe they start off as agnostic, maybe an atheist, but they make a decision, take action, spiritual conversion, spiritual progress, and they reach the place of knowing. You know, again, do you want to know God or do you want to know about God? You know, with a belief, there's always doubt attached to belief because someone handed it to you. Something you got it yourself, you work for it, you experience it without, with knowing there's no doubt. Knowing will never let you down in times of crisis. And a simple, you know, it's always there. So as you can see in the chart, knowing that something you do, for a few days and stop doing, it's going to take you to interfere with your life a little bit. It requires involvement, participation, also costs you something. These other things don't cost you anything. Cost you something, not money. I'm talking about letting go of stuff. So, being Gnostic is more than, what you do and don't do. It's more than reading about it. It's more than acting spiritual. It's a way of life, and there's no grade system here. Who's God, who knows God more and stuff like that. Knowing God is knowing God. It's just a spiritual life. It's where we receive the strength, inspiration, guidance, and direction we're looking for, you know. Um, so it's like kind of like I'm gonna turn off this thing. It's kind of like this. Hypothetically, let's say Richard in here has never tasted a mango in his life, never tasted it. And we ask him what he believes a mango taste. Well, actually, what Ali tells him what a mango tastes like. Billy tells him, and Judy tells him a mango tastes like. So now he's going to base what a mango tastes like on the testimony of what? Another person. And then he's going to taste the mango and realize those people are, I have a different experience and he's going to know it, you know. And just like, you cannot know what mango tastes like unless you have experience, and we cannot know God without having some type of experience. Um, One of my favorite little stories is there's an old saying, a dog that does not see the rabbit eventually what gives up the chase. And the story is there's one dog chasing this rabbit, and after a while, another dog just sees him chasing a rabbit, but doesn't see the rabbit, just sees a dog after something. Before there's 50 dogs. And for an hour, they're chasing one chasing a rabbit. And what happens when the other ones don't see the rabbit? They all leave, right? And we're doing the same thing here. If we, if we keep chasing God based on the testimony of another person, we'll abandon the chase. I mean, how do you gain experience riding a bicycle? By watching others ride? You got to make conscious contact with the bicycle. You got to hop on. Most of you who learned to ride a bike probably couldn't do it at first and went on your own and did it. I did, and, but that's the thing. Being, the let's just go into let's jump into we agnostics here. And before we get there, hold on to page 44. I want to show you guys something. We're going to jump a little bit forward to page 84. So step 2 in the book begins on page 44. This is 44 pages later, you know, lots of directions and action that goes in between in 40 pages. And it says, and we have ceased finding anything, even alcohol, for this time sanity has returned. So you see, step 2, if we could have sanity return in step 2, it'd be a 2-step program. We probably wouldn't be kicking it here on a Thursday night doing a book study. It would be the easiest program ever. We got to do some work. We must do inventory, must discuss another, must do 6 and 7, let it go, make amends, and continue doing it 10, 11, 12. So step 2, I look at it as like a road sign, a street sign, go this way. And it's a mirror of step 1, powerless power. So let's go to 44. And it says, in the preceding chapter, we learned something of alcohols, and we hope now we made the clear distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If you honestly want to, you find you can't quit entirely. That sounds like the obsession they're talking about. Or if when drinking, you have little control of the amount you take, that's the allergy, then you're probably alcoholic. Now, when you hear the word probably, we think of maybe or perhaps. Another word for for probably, which goes in the 1938 dictionary, is undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. So it kind of changes it, which means, there's no doubt. Um, if if that be the case, maybe something else is only a spiritual experience will conquer. To conquer means to gain control over something, defeat it. I remember being at a meeting and some old timer said, "There's no victory over alcohol. It's the chase that keeps you sober for victory." And I was like, "Whoa." Um, I like to turn those those into questions when I take someone through the first step. I mean, when I get here, because it's almost like my pre-ABCs. And I always say, when you honestly want to and find you can't quit entirely, do you have that? And the same thing with the little control. Do you have that? And um, and how do I know something? How I always ask them, how do you believe you're suffering from illness? Only spiritual experience will conquer, because admitted defeat. Look what it says here, and this is some deep stuff. To one who feels he is atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. That's allergy obsession. To be doomed to alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not easy alternatives to face. That's almost crazy, because we're trying to avoid death when we walk into AA, right? And people have often asked me, what does spiritual mean? And this is just my opinion or interpretation, but my personal definition that I love, which one of my mentors, Derek's, always said, the best I always think is when you work with people and you talk about God, you speak kindergarten much as you can. And he said, is the comprehension of doing the right thing through personal knowledge and understanding of God's will. And that becomes even more clear, as we develop a deeper God consciousness, that sixth sense, you know, fourth dimension. And when you know God, you are always know what the right thing is. You know, we always had that sense. I mean, when I was out there running around the streets and I was committing stupid crimes, I knew there was, that what I was doing was wrong. I knew at times I better stop. We did 4 through 9 and move all that crap out of the way, and we gain clarity. That's what step 11 means when it says what used to be a hunch or a capable expression gradually becomes a working part of the mind. So that little bit of knowing what the right thing is where, you know, all of a sudden we gain that. But the part to be doomed to alcoholic death and living not easy alternatives to face. So alcoholic death is, to me, is going back to the cycle of drinking, on an endless run in maybe 2 years, maybe 2 months, maybe 10 years. But there's always two options right there, death or live, you know, sounds, like reasoning, but I see guys, I witness people come in here, newcomers, come into these rooms and sit around, do nothing, driven by fear, driven by resentment, instincts drive them crazy, don't want to do the steps. And they fear abandon themselves to God in this way of life. And since it's unfamiliar with them and these steps are only promised to them, they go back to what's familiar and go back to what worked and starts drinking again. But notice one thing I want to point out to you before we move on. It does not say to be on a spiritual basis. It says to live on a spiritual basis. Being spiritual and living spiritual are oil and water, two different things. Men in recovery believe it's all about being spiritual. So instead of doing the steps, they attempt to act spiritual and cover up their resentments and, by acting good. But that always catches up to you. But to live spiritual is hard work. That's why we got the steps. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were exactly of that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope that we weren't true alcoholics. We're not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact we must find a spiritual basis, or else what? Go back living in the three-dimensional world. So perhaps it isn't going to perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But Sheriff, some like half of us thought we were atheist or agnostic. but experience shows that we must not be disconcerted. It means disconcertment means don't be concerned, overly concerned about it. Now, this is the part that gets me. If a mere code of morals or better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. So a code of morals is a set standard of laws or rules that I can say good people live by. I try to live by those. What my parents taught me, what friends taught me, the teachers, the church, the AA meetings taught me when I was not doing the steps, what I learned in rehab or jail, what self-help books, you know, with therapists, acting spiritual. My question is just when you think about what codes did you try? Code of morals did you try? You know, like I said, I was raised by the church, and they pushed morals on me, but I could not live up to those. And some of you, I have a few of his books. Alan Watts, one of the greatest philosophers of the last 50 or 60 years, longer than that. My grandma used to listen to him, and he lived right out here in Berkeley, not far from where I lived. And one of the most amazing spiritually minds of ever, and still blows my mind when I read some of his stuff. And one of the saddest things is that they found him on his boat dead from what? Alcoholism. One of the greatest spiritual minds of our time, and he died a drunk because he couldn't live up to his own moral codes. That's what happens. He says, but we who have found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all might, but the needed power wasn't there. When we, so that's the thing, you know, is a lot of people pray for that, pray for the needed power, but in order to take action like that person said, whatever, and I think what it says in here, our human resources as marshaled by the will were not sufficient, they fail utterly. What does marshal means? It means arranged or guided. Think of a U.S. Marshal, they also, can arrest you, as marshal controlled. So our human resources were arranged or guided by our will. Human aid using human resources. I would say more than 10 times this book, it talks about how human aid fails us, yet people run the meetings, you know, and seek relief from an illness that is a deadly disease, trying to use own human power, even though their own human power could never stop them. And my friend Derek used to say, what's 100 times zero? Zero. How much power is there in a group? There might be good aura, but the power to overcome alcoholism is not there. It's not a self-help group. It's not a self-help program. It's not group therapy. It's not a we program. It's a spiritual program. Now we get down to the deep stuff. The lack of power. That was our dilemma. So I thought lack meant like, I owe Kevin in here $5,000 and I give him $4,090. I'll give you the rest later. No, that's not what it means. I don't lack $5,000. If I lack $5,000, that means I don't have $5,000. It means zero, none. So no power was our dilemma, is what they're saying there. And I thought it was lack of friends, lack of money, lack of women, lack of sex, relationships, lack of the fancy fast car, the Mustang, which I had to have, the right house or the right job, right drugs and alcohol. And what happened? So what I lacked, I pursued. Did you lack what, did you, what you lacked in, did you pursue? Whatever I lacked in, I pursued, I chased. Where? Outside myself, out here, right? Where does a sane mind seek solutions? Outside themselves. What is this? This is an internal journey. So let's see what it says. Now we get down to we're about to go deep. So, Lack of power, or we had to find a power which we could live. It had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously, but where and how do we find this power? So now we're getting to location and method, right? Location and method. Where's the location of the power? Where's the method we use? So for how we find the power, we're gonna go back to page 25 real quick. I'm sure most of you know the answer to this one. All right. So see how we find the power. It says almost none of us like the self-searching. That sounds like step four. It's a deep examination of our thoughts and what drives us to, want to uncover those thoughts. The leveling of pride, which is all 4 through 9. The confession of our shortcomings sounds like step five. Um, which process required for successful consummation? I always say that's 6 through 9. You know, so what's the method to find God that we have? The secret code: 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then I'm going to get the 10 and live step 4 through 9 and 10. I'm going to connect to God in step 11. I'm going to do God's work and help people. And again, just like the codes in the what methods have you tried? I tried, yoga, Christianity, meditation, LSD and meditation. That didn't work. But therapy, books, doctors, ministers, churches, all that stuff was great. And all it did was trim away the branches and made me, somewhat look good in someone's eyes. When I ran out of options over the years, and I was burnt down on the ground, I did the one thing I didn't want to do. I got down on my knees, made a decision to take action at 4 through 9. And I was more than able to get to the root of the problem. I was able to pull the root completely out of the ground. So how do we find the power? 4 through 9. So now we're going to talk about the location. So for that, we're going to jump forward in We Agnostics to page 55. So, um, I'll give you a little background so you can see where I'm coming from on certain things. For some of you might not have this experience, some might, but I grew up in an old school Catholic family. Um, I thought it was like they would say, "Oh, what did you see?" "Oh, I'm German and Catholic." It's just what I thought it was, and everything was built around that in our home. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten to 8th grade. I never missed church on Sunday. Was an altar boy. My mother and grandmother, my aunties, all told me that if you don't pray, you'll go to hell. That's just what they just read and what they were told. They also warned me that God was always watching. You know, that if I did bad things, God would what? Punish me. So I had this elementary view of God, sitting high up in these clouds with this, big chair with a long white beard looking down on me, passing judgment on anything I made. And I'm supposed to live by these ideal standards of the church. And I love church. I love just like, I don't knock A meetings. I love A meetings. I love all this stuff now. But I had these standards I was supposed to live by, and all it did was like, when's it gonna get better? And um so as I got older and more frustrated with God, and God was not just punishing. I mean, he was angry, he was unloving, he was mean, judgmental, was never there. So those conceptions led to doubt. Those thoughts came from nowhere but my mind. Here's the scary part. I was 31 years old and still had a child's conception of God. That's like being 31 years old and still believing in Santa Claus, believing in the Easter Bunny, from that simple conception. But when I was a little kid, I remember, you know, I, what I couldn't grasp as a little kid with, and an adult, was that they said God was all loving, who would heal, yet withholds healing from some and offers to others. That's just the way my mind works. And, but it's threatening to burn me and send me down below, you know. all this, it just confused me. So that's how I walked in here. And, and I wanted that God was all loving, and I didn't know where I'd find it. So around 55, yep, we're seeing a different kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above their problems. You know, they said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We did that. Later on in 68, it says we can laugh at those who think spirituality is a way of weakness. It reverses. We had seen spiritual release, but like I tell ourselves, it wasn't true. I was like, come on, here they go again. Now, this is the part that really gets me. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down, every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God. Fundamental means principle or foundation. You can have a stadium full of people, the biggest stadium in the world, there's not one person there who's never heard of the idea of God. But look at this, though. It may be obscured by calamity. What's calamity? Chaos, drama. By pomp, which is pride. What's pride? It's it's a false pride aspect, is fear of what other people think of me. And so maybe obscured by pride, by worship of other things. We know the things we've worshiped, right? But in some form or another, it was there. For faith and the power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts, as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God um, was a part of our makeup, just as much the feelings we have for a friend. Now, when I was doing the steps first time, my sponsor knew I was a tough nut to crack. And he just looked at me, he goes, what do you look for in a friend? Like a really good friend. What's your perfect friend? And I said, unconditional love, loyalty, respect, honesty, always there, humble, forgiving, unjudging, and someone who listens. And my sponsor looked at me and he goes, that sounds like one heck of a friend. He goes, you're never going to find that friend that has all those because we're human. He goes, but you might find it with God. And he just moved on. But here's the condition of that. You know, it says sometimes we had to search fearlessly. Now, fearlessly doesn't mean to have no fear. It means fearless. We face it. We had to go to the fear. But he was there. He was as much fact as we were. Now, here's the highlighter, the underliner, and one line that changed my life. We found the great reality deep down within us. And the last analysis, after looking everywhere else, it is only there where he may be found. It is so with us. So this great reality, why is it capitalized? Because he's talking about God. And where is his power? Deep down within us. The amazing thing here, Bill Wilson just explained God in one sentence. During my lifetime, or your lifetime, how long does it take a person to explain God? Especially like the guys come by your house in the suits and explain God. When I was drinking, I used to let those guys in my house just for entertainment reasons, and take them for hours, you know. I was looking out here for God. I was looking in the wrong place. But when I read this, that God was deep down within us, my childhood conception of God shattered. It was like you know, like a window breaking, falling out, and hitting the ground. It was. And all he did was ask me a simple question after that. He didn't say, you ready to do this? He says, are you willing to believe, you know, in the power greater than yourself? And I said something like, you know, I thought I would never say this, but yes. And I was like kind of shocked, because the first time in many years I had hoped, but the truth is I had no other choice. After years of trying the other way, I finally accepted, just that a spiritual problem. And the greatest journey of my life began. You know, speaking of spiritual solution, you know, it's, we find this great reality, and I had to seek it because my old ideas were resentments and prejudices, and but then they're replaced with something more beautiful, you know. being willing to believe in God could restore me to sanity, catapult me to make that decision and do step three and seek the action I needed. And it's like I was stumbling around in the dark, looking for God in the dark. I always use this analogy. Let's just say all of us are at a party together. That'll be scary, but all of us are at a party together, non-alcoholic party, we'll say. Um, and I say, "Hey, everybody, I'm leaving." And Ali looks outside the window and he goes, "Hey, Steve is down on his knees under the street light outside." You know, um, and so he comes outside and a couple other people, and they go, "Hey, where's the keys? What are you looking for?" "Oh, my keys." And they're all on the ground. Billy comes out, and Paul comes out, and Jen's out. We're all sitting there down on our knees looking for these keys. Finally, Richard goes, "Hey, where'd you leave the keys?" "Well, I dropped them over by my car somewhere." But it seemed crazy not to look at it in the dark. I might as well come over here and look for it in the light. That's exactly what I had done my whole life. I was like this person crying, crawling around, looking for it in the wrong place, stumbling around, and you know, that's just how insane it was. Exactly what I used to do, always looking in the wrong place. I'm looking for the solution outside myself. The truth is, rather than God being somewhere out here, but we find out that God's a portion of us. And if there's no place, you know, the one thing that people always talk about, that if there's no place that God is not, then why wouldn't he be inside of you also? And I mean, every creature has some type of guidance system. Why not us? You know, I'm going to read some of you have read poems by Rumi before. Rumi was a poet way back in the day, and this is probably 300-year-old, 400-year-old poem. And it's not meant to insult anybody or anything like that, but it says, "I examined the whole Christian cross. He was not there. I entered the temple of the Hindus to the ancient pagods, but I could not find him anywhere. I searched in the mountains, in the valleys, in the Kajah. He was nowhere to be seen. He was neither in the heights nor in the valleys. My search was in vain. I was directed in my pursuit to Kaaba and Mecca. He was not there either. I questioned all the greatest scholars of the time and all the greatest philosophers. He was beyond their understanding. Finally I looked at my own heart. It was there where I saw him. He was nowhere else to be found." People always say, that they need to get in recovery. I need to get closer to God. And you get that talk at meetings a lot, and and in church too. You know, how close should we need to get God, when it's already within us? All we need to do is remove the stuff, you know. And Bill says it's only there may be found, and if so, it does. The word found is critical, meaning I must look within to find the power. I must seek. So let's look at the promises of this God conscious awareness of God. It says we can only clear the ground a bit if our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, that's our old ideas, enables you to think honestly. Honesty is knowing, being honest where you're at the moment. Encourage you to search diligently, that means thoroughly, within yourself. How do we do that? 4 through 9. Then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway with this attitude. That's looking honestly, looking within yourself. With this attitude, you cannot means what? Never. This attitude, you will never fail. The consciousness of your belief will sure come to you. What they're saying there is the awareness of God will sure come to you. Because the action, 4 through 9, our belief system turns into reality. And that's where we get zapped into the other dimensions. So many of us in here have had, you know. Um, I believe God comes to the quiet mind. God can enter a mind that is full of conflict and resentments and all this stuff. And I don't think you know, I study all religions, I love all of it. And but I don't think God is as interested in us loving him as much as he's interested in us loving each other and ourselves. I think it's all the same. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Thomas Merton. You look him up. You have yards of reading to do. He's a Christian and a monk. There's a name behind it, but he's amazing. If just look up the Thomas Merton prayer sometimes, it will blow your mind. Thomas Merton says, when we entered the region which we had never suspected, the old world of our senses is now the one that seems strange, remote, and unbelievable, while the new world seems familiar and obvious. So the old world was our illusions that everything's out here. The new world's familiar because we've always had it, because it was always within us. So, today, I mean, I know being, you know, built in the image and likeness of my creator is not referring to this, skin, bag of dust I call it body. It must be, the life form that's in me, you know, and this is just the way I look at life, and I mean, the Sacramento River flows constantly. We could always stand next to that any river, but is it the same water that flowed in there yesterday? No, it's always flowing. That's what we want to do. We were too caught up being reservoirs and keeping everything in instead of being a river. And like one person asked me recently, is there life after death? Better question is my friend Derek. I keep saying him. Richard knew him well. Um, he would say, well, I have a better question for you. Is there life before death? Because life's within us. That's where it is. Just to kind of give you guys a background, like I was talking about my journey through this, is remember my child conception of God, the punishing, unloving, and mean, judgmental. And a lot of you probably had the same experience. When I did step 5, guess what? I mean, I discovered I was punishing, I was angry, I was unloving, I was judging, I was critical, I was humorless, I was demanding, I was hard to find. I was, trying to fix things outside myself. So the God I resented, I feared, I didn't want anything to do with, that idea of God always had, you know, that I always had, I used the characteristics of it, even though, and it was like, I didn't mean that to happen, it just did. It wasn't God that, made me, the 12 steps, you know, moved me to a whole different dimension. I built a God that was an image and likeness of myself. That's scary. And then I found this unlimited power and resource to the 12 steps. And like, and remember the feelings for a friend. I mentioned the unconditional love and the loyalty. And when I did step 10 and I started really kicking it every day, um, I started to look for the good in other people. I started to be unconditional love, courage, forgiveness, open-mindedness, honest. I received strength and direction. I didn't know it right away until I stepped back and looked. And so this God, once you have that Knox's party, it's real. It's always there. You can't turn it off. What it says in this book, God is the Father and we're the children. We're all one. So the God I discovered was result of the actions I took. Until I realized that God, if God's not the center of my life at all times, something else is at that moment. Resentments or something like that. But with this, I can go back and have this ultimate retreat place. I can go within, discover the knowledge, the direction, guidance I need. It's just like I want to close with this, and this was um hold on a second. This thing's bouncing around. This is an acorn, right? But are you sure it's an acorn? Because it looks like to me it's an acorn. So this little acorn is the ultimate symbol of spiritual growth and unlimited potential. It's a symbol of transformation and change because it turns in to something totally different than what it originally was, right? It's hard to believe this little acorn will grow into this huge, gigantic oak tree because it doesn't look anything like the image and likeness of the creator, not at all. But here's the interesting thing is, once this acorn falls from the tree and hits the ground, this miraculous miracle takes place. The acorn knows exactly which way to turn to get enough sunlight, where it goes to get enough water. Germination takes place and the roots find the right soil. That tells me within this little acorn is all the information it needs to survive, and then turns into what it's encoded to be, the image and likeness of its creator. Question for you to take home is, are we any different from this thing? We too have all the information we need to survive. You know, the symbol of the acorn is the miracle of life that's deep down within us. That's when I see an acorn, I see an oak tree. The oak tree is within the acorn. It's like God's within all of us. So when I see you guys and ladies, I see God. You know, with the acorn is the oak tree, God is you. You know, we can transform an image like it's our creator. You know, and this, you know, one of my friends, and I'll sum it up with this. It's kind of a silly analogy, but he says, hypothetically, let's say you ask an apple pie, where are you? The apple pie will say, I come from apple. So it's not going to say it comes from pineapple. You would expect it to be like what it was from. We understand that, simple, right? But when many of us are asked what, you know, what we think we are, we think of this pack of bones and skin and organs we are. We don't understand that we too must be what we came from. What, you know, we're all pieces of God, you know, we're all part of a divine source. And what we are is infinite and unlimited. That's the thing. The steps can take you that far and that deep. And we understand what you really are, and you will know you are not a human being trying to have a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being trying, you know, trying to figure out what it means to be human. You know, we're all destined for greatness, you know, and so just remember what's inside your inner core is a precious gift that will take you home again. You know, call it what you will, you know, but just let it take you. I'm gonna end the meeting with that.